And that's where we come tonight. If you back up to Deuteronomy 28, look at verse 37 in Deuteronomy 28. It says, and this is tonight's promise, God promised a curse upon his chosen people as they wandered the world without a homeland. Not just scatter them. He promised a curse would rest on them. And this is one of the hard things to understand. Why would God do all this? Why would God allow them to suffer so much? If you ever read a history of the Jewish people, it's enough to just make you ill. I mean, they just get going in Venice and they cast them out of Venice and they do a pogrom there. So they all move to France and they just get established with all their arts and merchants and they have a pogrom there and the Inquisition and they burn a bunch of them and they kill and smash the children. So they all move to Spain and then they all run to Russia and they get there and they start farming and raising potatoes and making a little money and they run them out of there and they all go to Poland and then they put them into a ghetto and they gas them all to death. I mean, it's like, can't we find a place? Leave us alone. But why? Well, look at what it says in verse 37. You will become, this is Deuteronomy 28:37. You will become a thing of horror and an object of scorn and ridicule to all the nations where the Lord will drive you. You know what one of the promises God gave is? That the Jews would not be able to find a place to feel secure anywhere. They would just gradually be driven out. Keep going to the right to 2 Chronicles, because I want to show you how much God repeats this. So you're in Deuteronomy, then Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 2 Samuel, 1 2 Kings, 1 2 Chronicles, chapter 7. 2 Chronicles 7. By the way, you could get tons of repetitive verses on everything I've shared with you, because there's so many. As I told you, more chapters and more verses are about this. But look at 2 Chronicles 7:20. This is what it says. This is Solomon dedicating the temple. You know verse 14. Everyone knows 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. You know that verse. Look at verse 20. Then I will uproot Israel from my land. Do you know there's no place in the universe that God looks on the same way he looks on Israel? He calls it my land. He says, that's mine. It's not the nations. It's not the United Nations. It's mine. See, he's still pretty attached to this place. I will uproot Israel from my land, which I have given them, and reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. This is at the dedication of the temple. This is 3,000 years ago. God is warning about this. But look at the end of the 20th verse. I will make it a byword and an object of ridicule among all people. Catch that? All people will ridicule the Jews, their temple, their objects of worship and what they've done. Keep going to the right to Jeremiah. So it goes 1 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah. Jeremiah, one of those big major prophets. Keep going to the right. Jeremiah 29. Jeremiah 29 and verse 18. Again, another huge section. Jeremiah was so much warning. By the way, Jeremiah oversaw the destruction of Jerusalem. He was a prisoner of war, and he was brought to Jerusalem and kept in Jerusalem as it fell, as it was ransacked, as it was burned, and the Babylonians freed him and allowed him to watch the destruction of Jerusalem, and he wrote the laments over the destruction of Jerusalem. We know it as Lamentations. And that man that witnessed the destruction, look what he writes in chapter 29. He says, God told me to tell you that I will pursue them, in verse 18, with the sword. Jeremiah 29:18 says, with famine, with plague, and will make them abhorrent to all the kingdoms of the earth, and an object of cursing and horror, of scorn and reproach among all the nations where I drive them. You know what one of the evidences of the God that you can trust is? Go to any museum in the world that has Holocaust things in it, and look at the displays of the political cartoons about Jewish people. These caricatures. You can see them in every newspaper of almost every nation on earth. Try and find someone making a there is no other ethnic group that globally for so many centuries have been such an object of scorn and hatred. And why is that? Because of Jeremiah 29:18. God says, I'm going to make you an object of cursing, horror, scorn, reproach among all the nations where I drive you. Keep going to 44, to the right. Jeremiah 44. Let me show you another one. 44 and verse 8. Why provoke me to anger? Jeremiah 44, verse 8. With what your hands have made, burning incense to other gods in Egypt, where you've come to live. You will destroy yourselves. And, he says it again, and make yourselves an object of cursing and a reproach among all the nations of the earth. Okay. How do we know who God is? God says, I'm the one that can tell you the future before it happens. I don't just tell it to you vaguely. I will specifically tell you the future. God says, the way you can tell the future is, I picked a group of people, they're called the Jews. I gave them a group of land, it's called Israel. Then I took them to that land, the promised land. Like no other group of people, I took 3 million of them in, and they entered the promised land, they conquered it, and it became their nation. Then when they were disobedient to me, I am going to destroy their hold on that land. And I'm going to scatter them. And after I scatter them, number 6, everywhere they go, people will hate them, scorn them, mock them, ridicule them, and make them feel very unsafe. Those are 6. You know what the rest of them are? He says, then I'll bring them back at the end of days. And they will rebuild all the cities and call them by Bible names. And they will build an exceedingly great army that the world will take notice of. And then, after they make the desert bloom, which they have, he says, I will bring the nations of the world at the head of the nations, Iran, Persia, against them. And we're going to see these successfully as we look at them each Sunday night. Every one of the promises God made have come true. So, God has made hundreds of promises to the direct descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All of these promises and predictions are part of God's offer to us to identify who's the true God. Do you know what the real conflict in the Middle East is today? It's not, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, Muslim. It's who is the real God? Is it the God of Muhammad, or is it the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? That's the flashpoint for the end of the world. And it's shaping up so fast, it's unbelievable. Is it Allah or is it Yahweh? Is it the Muhammad's vision God or the true and living God who revealed himself through his word? That's all the world is coming down to. And you and I are sitting right in the middle of it. We live in the great Satan. With Great Britain and Israel, we're the great Satan trio. Israel, Britain, and America. The only 3 countries that have shown long-term kindness to the people of God. We're the great Satan, to Allah, to Islam. Well, there are 3 red alerts for any student of Bible prophecy. God says, I stake my entire reputation on the prediction that, number 1, the Jewish people will be acting as a sovereign nation. They are. They will be in possession of Jerusalem. They are. And they will be seeking to build a temple. They're just starting to want that. And God says, when you see that, God says, know that I'm God. And know that I've told you the end from the beginning. And know that I'm the God you can trust. Amen?